Welcome to the Adult Table, a SASE podcast where we sit down with people in the SASE and our STEM community. We set the virtual table to bring in a diverse set of guests to engage in a casual conversation on their professional career and life.
With this podcast, we hope that we can bridge the gap between the hierarchy involved with growing up. We can redefine what it means to be able to figuratively sit at the adult table. I'm one of your co-hosts, Jenny Chung.
And I'm one of your other co-hosts, Jason Chin. Today, we have a very special guest for our inaugural episode, our fairest leader, the CEO and director of the organization that is near and dear to many people, Mr. Khanh Vu. Khanh is currently living in Colorado and has been CEO and executive director of SASE since 2011. So welcome, Khanh, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. The inaugural show. So
we got to save it for you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So Khanh, can you briefly just introduce yourself and talk about your journey, professional and or personal?
Sure. Well, I think most people know that I'm an immigrant. So there was this thing called the Vietnam police conflict, technically not a war, but yet, 50 some American lives were lost and millions of Vietnamese lives were lost. That was in the 60s and 70s. So I was born in the 70 time frame, and the Northern Communist government at that time took over in 75, the fall of Saigon. And so our family left, taking the chance. So I was about 5 at that time. It consisted of my father, my mother, my sister, and myself, an aunt, and our grandfather on my father's side, so my paternal grandfather. And we came to America. Typical, we were in Guam because they literally fish you out of the water, boats, and then move you to a military base in Guam. And then they process you. And actually, at the time, my mom and dad was split up. My dad had to go back and grab my paternal grandfather. And so we head out first. And we were just darn lucky to be, to be picked up by the U.S. Navy and transported to Guam. And that's where we met up with my dad. And we were there for a few months as they process us as political asylum. And then we were, if you know the history, all the immigrants at the time were, I think, diverted to 3 U.S. bases, mainland side. So we were in Fort Chaffee, Arkansas for another few months as they process up. There's a great movie called The Green Dragon. Patrick Swayze and Forrest Whitaker talks about that journey right there. Camp Pendleton is one of the other camps in California that processed political asylums, folks fleeing the end of the war there. And so we were adopted out. So to get out of those camps, you have to be adopted out of the camps. We were adopted by a family in upstate New York on a farm, basically kind of, I wouldn't say slave labor, but definitely free labor is how they saw it. And so we got out of that situation after being adopted out of the camp, probably 3 or 4 months, or maybe 6 months. And we found some family relatives in Buffalo, New York. We were there for a while. In Buffalo, New York, if you ever been there during the winter, is nothing close.
Oh yeah, I have.
Right.
For sure. Yeah.
I have a picture of me when I was about 6 years old, and the snow pile was higher than me. And so we're like, okay, this is not the balmy tropical Vietnamese weather that we're used to. And so we have another relative in Colorado, and we've been there ever since. I grew up, pretty much most of my life here in Colorado. I consider myself pretty much close to being a native, not quite technically, but pretty close. Been here for 40 plus years. Went through the school system, studied at the Colorado School of Mines, yay, ore diggers, and got a chemical engineering degree, so a couple of minors. Worked as an engineer for a while, for 5 years with Amoco, production engineer, oil field. Then BP bought them out. I didn't want to move to Houston because I was offered a job in Houston. I love going and visiting Houston. Yay, my Houston folks. Love the place. Yeah. Great food, great people. You have terrible weather, by the way.
Oh, no.
Terrible weather. All right. It's nothing that you can do. It's nothing about you. It's nothing personal.
Right.
It's just the weather there is just terrible. I love my outdoor weather here in Colorado. So I refused to move. I took severance. My parents at the time had a small grocery store, about 5,000 square feet. And then we grew it to very successful, to a 31,000 square foot grocery store, basically a small, Walmart grocery store type size. And we bought some real estate with that, did very well there. We sold the real estate to a Lowe's Development Corporation, and then sold the store, and my parents retired. And so I was part of the family, and I kind of retired at the same time. I was 32. And so for like a year and a half, I kind of stayed up till, midnight one, and then woke up around 10 and 11, jumped on the internet for a couple hours, and I call that work.
Yeah.
And then my parents
Feel
said that I was about to get married, and that's not how I should be role modeling for my kids soon. And so I probably should either go back to school or find a job that I like. And then at that point, I was studying for my GRE. I wanted to go get my PhD. And then the Colorado School of Mines called me and said, "Hey, we have the multicultural engineering program director available." And the person who I reported to was Dean of Students, and I know him as Dean C because I worked with him when I was a student. It's really great when you go into your final interview and you high five your boss, your potential
Oh,
boss.
wow. Yeah, that's awesome.
So it was fun. So I became the fourth executive director, the director of the MEP program there. And I have a long history with that program. I was one of the first students. So the program started when I was a freshman. So I was part of that program from the beginning. I go back every year when I can because I really, love the school and love the mission and love the students. Then I came across SASE, and I was like,
Right.
cool. This is something I care about. I volunteered for SASE for a year and a half, and then when they needed an executive director, and then the rest is history. It's been 9+ years now, I guess. So and here we are.
And here we are. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, you mentioned like through your, personal life that, after coming from Vietnam, and then also pursuing education like here in the States. So I guess a question for you is like, how does being an immigrant and first generation in your family to go to college like affect your outlook on like life or just like anything else that you view?
Well, I think the struggles of a first generation is real. I mean, I could give you a couple of stories that demonstrate that. So my college counselor one day sent a note. So I applied to Ivy League, the Ivy Leagues, like every child of a Tiger mom and dad.
Yep.
I applied to the Ivy Leagues. I didn't know what to do. I thought I had good grades. I had test scores that were well. I thought that was good enough. And I literally typed up my essays the night before and mailed it in with all the mistakes, punctuation errors, and everything in. I thought, that's just minor, not knowing that that was a huge part of how they evaluate. And I was really bummed because I was put on all the waiting lists. So I applied to probably most of the Ivies, and I was put on a waiting list, most of them. And then one day I was called down someone sent a note from the counselor's office saying, "Khan, you got into Harvard." And I was like, no way. They took me off the waiting list and put me in Harvard. I ran down and I read the letter, and it says, "You are accepted into Hartford."
Uh,
And I was like, no,
Oh, no.
Hartford is not Harvard. And I looked at my counselor and I go, I mean, my college counselor was an ex-Jaguar and jeweler, and that's what he knew. He didn't know about college counseling. He didn't know, and I didn't know the difference because I was the first in my family to go to college. So I didn't know what was important, what was not important, things like that. I have to say that because of my quote failures, that my sister got into John Hopkins. Not that I
Oh.
helped her get it.
You paved
Her
the path
rightful,
for sure.
Yeah.
rightful place, did all the stuff that she needed to do, and she was smarter than me and learned from my mistakes. I mean, Colorado School of Mines is not a bad school, but I mean, again, there are challenges. What do you do about financial aid? What do you apply? What is works? I mean, all these questions that, not being the first one in your family, someone, your parents go to college or your siblings go to college, those answers and those tips are really helpful. I mean, like I said, I was clueless. And I should have asked more questions. I think today's youth and the resources that are available today are much more prevalent than when I went through college. And I'm pretty sure there were resources, but no one told me about them, right? And given that my college counselor in high school confused Harvard with Hartford, you can tell the quality and level of the counseling I got, right? So.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like, I also kind of went through, well, I'm the youngest of four, so it's kind of different, but in that my siblings and I are really close in age, so we were kind of applying to colleges all at the same time. So we were all kind of going in blind because my parents also did not have the opportunity to go. And so I remember applying for everything, anything that I could, obviously with all the Ivy Leagues as well. And then going through all the financial aid and then figuring out how to even fill out the forms because my parents also had a language barrier where they couldn't even help me with any of that sort of thing. So I had to ask my siblings, or we figured it out like together on our own. But it was just like that whole process I remember was just so like painful in a way because I didn't know who else I could ask. And I just wish that there were like people, or I knew who to ask and there are people that I could ask. So that was a interesting time. But I feel like even now, like relating that to like adult things, like I still don't know things about like I hear people talk about like healthcare and like 401ks, retirement, all that stuff, and I'm like that's another part of it that I still am figuring out. And I'm sure a lot of other people, like new adults or even adults now, I'm using adults with quotes, like anyone in their life in any stage of life is still figuring out.
Yeah, this whole social justice and mobility issue, right?
Hmm.
About disenfranchised populations. I mean, if the generations before you, if your parents or grandparents never had access to any of these things, how would they know? How would they educate you? How would you model yourself in
Hmm.
doing some of these things, right? My kids have different expectations because they see myself and my wife do different things, but they have no understanding of some of the struggles we have, and that's okay because they didn't go through that. That's not the model and that's not the expectation that they see. But I think for someone who's used to it, who's grown up with parents who go to college and it's assumed, and where your resources are, they don't understand the struggle of those who haven't had that, just like you and I and many millions others.
Hmm.
Yeah, you had mentioned like social justice, and I guess it's a pretty relevant topic right now. Can you speak a little bit about SASE's public statements revolving any of like the Black Lives Matter stuff?
Yeah, the the position of SACE has to represent such wide diversity of folks, right? So folks who've been here for 3 years, I mean, 3 generations, folks who's been here, their parents came over, and folks like myself who just came over, and my parents who don't understand the history, who were sold a set of dreams that are different than what it really is. Growing up in the 80s, I remember that Baywatch with David Hasselhoff, Pamela Anderson, that was the number one exported show or exported anything out of the United States. There were more people in the world watching Baywatch than the people in the US, I believe, at the time, if I remember my stats correctly. So it tells you that Hollywood had a really good job of selling the American dream. And with the immigrants coming over, and not understanding the history of slavery, Jim Crow law, unfair housing practices, all of that is an education piece. And,
Hmm.
as an immigrant, you struggle and you don't have time to learn those things sometimes. You don't have the luxury to sit down, have those conversations. And so I think representing the larger group, and that's why like cases like at Harvard and the New York public school testing, you see Asians on both sides, right? Because especially the new immigrant Asians, they don't understand that history to process that, and they see that, and it's been sold that America is the land of opportunity. Yes, it is the land of opportunities. My family's made it really well,
Hmm.
but it's not 100% idealistic. It's still an ideal that we have not reached yet as a country. And so one of the things that SACE has done is we supported the statement about social justice and
Hmm.
about equality, because we recognize that exists. And what we're trying to do is educate our population. Like I said, there's a chunk of the Asian community who doesn't understand this. and it takes time, right, to educate folks and to have those conversations. And shouting matches and pointing fingers does not help the discourse and the education. And so I think SASE holds a really good place in the sense of we're trying to educate our folks, trying to have these civil conversation to help folks understand the situation and educate folks. And I think that's the perfect place to be. Doesn't mean that, as individuals that we couldn't do things. So for me personally, I'm mentoring one of my students from Mines who happens to be African American, and he works for a small engineering firm, and he's the only African American person in the firm out of 250 people.
Wow.
And they just
Crazy.
started their DNI DNI committee, and so I've been mentoring him of what do you need to do, understanding the politics, understanding what he needs to do to find support, build support, and educate his population, because honestly that company is pretty old school. I mean, of their top leadership of 20 some people, there are 3 women and 1 person of color, a male. And so, that's an uphill battle for him in that sense, and trying to educate those folks who don't understand, who've had the blinders on, honestly, who hasn't really researched the issue. So I personally, it's one of those funny stories. So my best friend from high school was African American, and I just hung out with him because he was smart and cool. And so I wanted some of that to rub off on me. And so there was this competition called the Pan-African Nurturing and Development Association, PANDA for short, by the way,
Oh,
in
wow.
Colorado. Yeah. And so it was a competition about everything African American, right? And I just hung out. So there was 4 people on the team, and my best friend was on the team, and I just hung out with them after school. I didn't want to go home, basically. So I just hung out, and they practiced. And then the competition was about to start like in a week or 2. And then they found out that one of the competitors was ineligible, right? And so they couldn't have a team of 3 because they would have been disqualified. They needed a 4th person. So they bring in me, the bench warmer, for that, because I didn't study for that. I was just hanging out, right? I was just like,
Right.
you wanted me to be the timer, or you wanted me to be the person who asked the question, right? And so my friend was super smart, and he answered most of the questions. So we went and we competed. And of all the audience and of all the competitors, I was one of 2 people who are not African American. It was very interesting. And we had a small team. We just 4 of us. Some of the other school had there were multiple sections. So they would have the geography team come up. So 4 new people would come up who specialized in geography. 4 new people would come up just in the Q&A session. And so what we did, and I think we had a fan favorite, is when they asked the other team to switch out members, we stood up and switched our seats. And the audience just had a laugh over that. And again, I didn't contribute anything to the team. I was there, for the most part, just to fill that seat, to keep it warm so that we didn't get disqualified. But they did ask a question, and you could raise your hand like in Jeopardy. You can buzz in before the question is answered.
Okay.
So one of the questions was, I forgot the date. It's been decades, but I think it was in, I don't even want to say the date, but in so-and-so date, and I buzzed in. For some reason, everybody looked at me like, that was the first time I buzzed in, by the way. Everybody looked at me like, what is he going to say? The question wasn't even answered, right? I mean, it wasn't asked yet. And I said, what was Canadians' Independence Day, Freedom, Emancipation Day, basically? And the judge looked at me and he's like, you're correct. And the whole crowd erupted. And that was the only answer I answered, by the way. That was the only question of the whole competition. Because like I said, I wasn't I wasn't studying for it. It was a week or 2 before the competition. And, hanging out with my friend and getting comfortable being uncomfortable, right? I think that's the lesson that we need to learn in this time and age is, when I was in high school, I came to that competition feeling really uncomfortable. A, I wasn't prepared. B, I was the only Asian there. I was one of 2 people who weren't Black, but I had fun with it, right? I was open to the experience. I want to be part of it. And our team, not because of me, because of my friend mostly, we won the state championship. So you can find my
Wow.
name on a plaque somewhere, I think in Boulder, Colorado, Boulder, Colorado, with my name for that year that we won the Panda Championship. And
Mhm.
so I was
Wow.
quote unquote inducted as a half brother at that point in time because we won the competition. But it was fun. And I would say to the listeners out there is, if you really want to grow, if you want to continually learn, you have to be uncomfortable. And some
Yeah.
of it is excruciating pain mentally sometimes is like, wow, when you walk into a room full of folks you don't know of different culture, you have to embrace it, and you show your respect, but you also try to have fun and show them who you are as a person, I think is the lesson I would say.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with that. Being comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's definitely something that I've learned along the way in my SACE journey. Being involved in a bunch of leadership positions and different initiatives, it's definitely something that I try doing in my both my professional life and also my personal life. And that's also the reason why I decided to move across the country. But it's definitely something that stays definitely like it has made such a huge impact in my life. And I guess going off of that and in your that mantra of like being comfortable with being uncomfortable. I know that you mentioned a lot in conferences and stuff like that when you have to go up and like talk that you're like introverted and you're not very one for like public speaking and all that sort of thing, but you ended up being in this like huge leadership position, like representing SACE. So like how was that journey for you in terms of like just being like the face of SACE, but also at the same time navigating that, I guess, like introvertness and sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, before I jump into the heart of the question, I appreciate you sharing that, because every time I hear stories of how SACE affects folks, it warms my heart. It does, because at the end of the day, that's what drives me. Really, we're preparing for, as everyone probably knows, for the national conference, and one of the tasks is we're doing our 10th anniversary, and so I'm looking through the 10 years of national conference and all the stories in the past 10 years of just like what you shared, folks who became uncomfortable but grew from that, right? They were challenged, they were forced to step up in one way or another, or dealt with a tough situation, and they came through that. They became stronger, and they created new friendships and learned more about themselves. I think it's been amazing, so thank you for sharing that. As for my journey, um, my wife will tell you I'm not as introverted as she is, but we have this argument all the time, this disagreement, is that I think she's actually a shy extrovert and I am a outgoing introvert, if that makes sense.
No, that
So
yeah,
Yeah,
that makes
I think
sense.
I'm.
and so you probably know this, and you've seen some pictures of me, is after like a national conference, especially at night, I have to get into my zone. I put on my headset. I think there's a picture of me, I think in Dallas, watching anime just to recover, right? I'm watching anime. People are like walking around me like crazy. I'm just like, I'm zoned in. I needed that time to recharge. And that's one thing I think folks have to understand is through these journeys, through these being uncomfortable, you learn about yourself. My sister's super book smart. She has all the credentials in the world. And she said something to me. She dated this guy for like 10 years, right? And then they broke up. And I asked her, so what did you learn about him? Right? What did you learn about him since you dated him for so long? And she said, it was not a lot about learning more about him, it's learning about me. Right.
Mhm.
And I think that's so true, is that through all these trials, you learn about other people and you learn about situation, but you really learn about yourself. What will you put up there? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What do you need to counterbalance things that, those skill sets that don't come naturally, right? I love just being in my own zone. Don't talk to me, leave me alone, type of stuff. But I know to be an effective, CEO and executive director of SACE, I have to be out there, right? So I have to build up the energy to put it out there, and then know enough to when I'm done is that I need to recharge. I need to go and, not drain my battery anymore, because I'll get grouchy. I'll get frustrated, my temper's shorter, things like that. And so I try to recognize what those battery levels are and when to say, okay, I need time out for myself to recharge and to do what I need to do to be effective later on. And so I think learning about yourself is really the key through this process as you grow. And I love continually challenging myself in different situations. That's why some people might say, you can't hold a job down, Khan. Well, that's partly true, but most of the changes in my career has been my choosing. And because I see the potential of the next job, and that's why I try to, put my mark on it and grow from it.
Yeah, Khan, thanks a lot for sharing. Yeah, I think a lot of SASE people can relate to their initiatives, their e-board positions. They're really learning a lot about yourself, learning your strengths, learning how to be a leader. I know I personally felt that. Definitely didn't expect to be here, but I love that it's giving me the opportunity to challenge myself. Even this podcast, not really knowing how to run one or knowing how to edit stuff or just like being comfortable talking to like a large audience. So I'm grateful for SACE for being that outlet for that. So I guess like, yeah, you talked a little bit about jumping around your jobs and kind of seeing opportunities there. So I was curious to know what you thought were some of the growth opportunities for SACE moving forward, and also kind of what surprised you about your SACE journey so far.
Well, I mean, when we started, when I started first volunteering, there were just like 6 or 7 volunteers in the beginning, right? And there were probably less than 18 chapters. And basically the 6 or 7 volunteers helped the collegiate chapter kind of form and support them. And so I think now that we're over 100 chapters and our conference, last year was over 3,000, 160 university representative, 130 companies represent. So we've grown quite a bit. I mean, and that growth is fueled by the volunteers, what we call the SACE squad, the members, the contractors, the staff. It's been a really great ride in the sense of everybody's put forth their effort and they really speak to the mission. One of the things I'm really, really proud of SACE is the culture that we have. We were on our second national conference. That was the first time we called all the chapter leaders together and we had kind of a chapter leader meeting. And I was in the room and I counted heads. And at the time we had about 35, 37% female chapter leaders. And I thought, wow, this is amazing because at that time, women only comprised of, particularly in engineering, about 15%. So we were double that. And somebody asked me, why are there so many women in SACE? And it took me on this journey and I was like, why are there so many women in SACE? And I was thinking, and I was like, it's because of our culture. It really is. And what that culture is, we are super, folks who join SACE are high potential. I mean, very brilliant, very smart, but very motivated. But the other thing about it is they're super supportive of each other, right? I think part of the SACE culture that attracts a lot of the women is that we support each other. We're not like, oh, I'm better than you, or I'm the president, you got to listen to me. SACE is not about that. SACE is like, how can I help you? What are we trying to achieve together, right? And that to me speaks volumes of, the future of SACE if we keep up that culture. And one of the things that, we talk about legacy a lot in the chapters because we know that, you're only going to be the chapter leaders for 2, maximum 3 years. You're not going to be there if you're there for 4 or 5 years, there's a problem, right? And that's not just with SACE, that's a problem in the individual, right? You got to move on. So we talk about legacy a lot because what kind of legacy do you leave for your chapter? And if I think about SACE, what's my legacy for SACE is the culture that we have created this culture. So whoever comes behind me, it's going to be really hard for them to change the SACE culture because the culture will reject them. If they come in and go, nope, I'm the CEO, I'm the executive, you got to do what I said. The community is going to reject them because that's not our culture. We don't do that. we're very collaborative. We have conversations. We talk about how can we help each other, and so that's probably one of the most things I'm really proud of that we've built within the last 10 years. As far as the future, and there's a whole wide area of things that we're planning on doing. I mean, this whole COVID pandemic changing things to virtual. I mean, we already have, I think this morning, over 2,000 people signed up for the conference. So we're accessing and giving people access to the national conference that may not have ever attended or could attend, right?
That's true.
The bar is much lower as far as economic and financial commitment. So I think we're, based on how we process after this conference, we may continue with the virtual nature of a conference somewhere in the future, even when we come back into, the physical meeting. I love the physical meeting, but, it's a lot of money for students, particularly, and I think back to the days when I came to America and we lived in government housing. We had food stamps, or now they call it SNAP. And I remember the cornflakes that came in a white box issued from the government, and the block cheese, that everything's white because they can't put any trademarks, right? It's probably made from the same place, but because it was government bought through food stamps, they can't put Kellogg's or, Wisconsin cheese or anything, but it's just, and I remember eating those things, and our family didn't have, in the beginning, we only ate meat, and that was chicken once a week because that's all we could afford. Right. And so I'm always thinking of how can we give access to people who don't have the money, and that's why we don't charge for membership. Honestly, that's one of the reasons we don't charge for membership. You look at our peer organization, everybody charges for membership.
They do,
right?
Yeah.
And we're one of the few organizations that go, hey, don't let us stop you. I mean, just click on and fill out your information, hit send, and you're part of SASE, right? And that's also due to one of my mentors, previous executive director of SWE, CEO of SWE, Betty Shanahan. Love her. She is a wealth of knowledge and wisdom, and she's been generous to share some of that with me. And she says to me one time, like, Khan, what is the barriers that you are putting up to stop people from coming to the organization? And that stays with me. I mean, that kind of, so I think about what barriers we put up artificially. Sometimes we do it on purpose for a reason, but it better be a darn good reason to put barriers, because I think there's so many people that could benefit from SASE that don't know about SASE yet. So we're only at 100 some chapters. We can easily be 250 to 300 chapters in the US, and you're not talking about Canada too, right? And so we're going to go international at some point. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we will go to Canada. And then, of course, there's a whole continent of Asia. So, China and India, graduate about 1 million engineers every year. 1 million, right? Every year, right? So there's a whole world to expose to what SASE does and how we can help them. The other thing is the professional world, like yourself. There's 1.5 million professional STEM folks of Asian descent. They don't know about SASE. I jokingly say, I'm not greedy. I only want 10% of those people. That's 150,000 people, right? That's all I need to touch within SASE, and we'll be fine. So we're really excited about the professional program this year. It's the second year, and we saw a 50% increase because of the virtual nature that's going to come to our conference this year. So very excited about that. And a lot of Asian in tech too. So many Asian in tech, in California in particular, right? And so there's another industry that we have yet to really put our imprint on. So very excited for the future of SASE. There's a lot to be done still.
Yeah, for sure. I know you mentioned about like the culture that SASE currently has. I definitely agree. It's like there's just like some sort of like familial aspect, like say the hashtag SASE fam, and the SASE squad. It's just like it doesn't seem like all the volunteers that I've worked with or interacted with, whether however long they've been volunteering for, there's just this sort of like, yeah, everyone's there to help you out, and they want you to succeed.
100%. That the SASE fam hashtag is I think speaks to the heart Not only that culture, but there's that foodie culture in there too.
Oh, yeah.
SASE is definitely a foodie organization. I mean, when you have an attendee who barely knows me come up to me and says, Khan, that food did not live up to my expectation. And I was like, okay, I got it. I'm going to talk to the executive chef. And I did, right? And I asked him for the comment. And so we're pretty serious about our food.
For sure, we do. Yeah, we definitely take it seriously. You take it seriously. You have a whole, foodie post that I see on social media. And then that's inspired a lot of, I see a lot of SASE chapters also have like SASE Eats. I think that's San Diego. Maybe they have like their own Instagram or something.
Oh yeah,
for
they
food
definitely do.
specifically. And then there's all these other like little pockets of groups that I've seen, like dance groups come up. I've seen like like music and all that sort of thing, which is awesome. Like it's not specifically just for the science and engineering part of your life. It's all other aspects, and that's what I love about SASE.
Yeah, I think when you surround yourself with really high potential folks, they're not just so narrowed down and so focused on an area. I think you have to bring, there's a term, bringing your full self, right? And I think hopefully SASE is an organization that lets you bring your whole self and celebrate who you are. We might not be comfortable with all of that yet, but I think the attitude is there that people can feel that they could bring them whole self. They may not know about it or they may not understand all of that, but I think people in SASE are comfortable to bring as much as they want to the table, right? And to your point, Jenny, there are a lot of pockets. I still see, and I love the whole startup kind of entrepreneur. If you can think it, well, okay, let's talk about what do you want to do in SASE, right? What are your parameters? What do you like? You guys, you're like, okay, we want to do this kind. We want to do a podcast, adulting. Okay, what does it take? Let's do it. Let's give it a shot.
Yeah.
I'm very much an experimenter in that sense, with startup culture, because I think that's where innovation happens, and you have to cultivate that, and you have to have the right culture. A top-down culture. You can't force innovation. You can't go, we're going to innovate. You need to innovate now, right? And I know exactly what innovation is, so I'm going to tell you how to do it. That kind of defeats the whole point of innovation, right? Because innovation comes from different corners in different places. It doesn't mean that you accept everything, but you give people a framework. Okay, what are you trying to accomplish? What do you need in resources? What can you contribute? What does SAFE has to? So having those conversations is good, and giving folks kind of an idea of, okay, here is maybe we start small, and then you can build on it. What are the next steps? So I love that about SASE. And a lot of some of the initiatives, SASE Tank came out of folks who are passionate about entrepreneurship, right? The marketing committee came out of somebody coming to me one day. Dave Pan and Alvin Lim said, particularly Dave, said to me, Khan, I think we need a marketing committee. And as an engineer and someone who's not been in marketing, I said, why? Right? And he laid out the argument. This is the reason why. And I said, okay, how much, financially do you need? What do we need to? It's like, okay, I can bring in some resources from P&G. They can help us out here. Okay, great. Let's give it a shot. And the marketing committee was born. That's the second oldest committee after the collegiate committee because of Dave's effort. And the funny thing is, he started as an engineer. He used that whole marketing committee to change his career into marketing.
Oh yeah, he is, yeah.
And so, we have so many SASE members like Keith, who was a science guy, and he loved HR so much. Now he's actually working as an HR function within Comcast. It's crazy, right?
Wow.
What I'm hearing is we will become podcasters.
Hey, stranger things have happened, right? So yeah, if you love this and this takes off, you never know. And I think that's the great thing about SASE is that we're still kind of experimental in that way. We help guide our folks, take that energy, take whatever that idea and put some, sticks in the ground a little bit and test the ground. Say, okay, let's test it here. Let's test it there. Does that work? Are you willing to? And if it doesn't, that's okay. I think that's okay. And I think that's a growth process, right? For the organization and the individual who comes up with the idea.
Yeah, I think I definitely resonated a lot with all of what you said. I think the SASE community is just so supportive of everything. Like, I think hearing from like collegiate side to national side, no matter what you bring up, they're really there to listen to you, really there to see where that goes. And I think that's like very uncommon, and I definitely appreciate it as a member. And even you see it sometimes played out in conferences. I know some regional conferences, you'll see some SASE people doing some dance performances or some like the mid break stuff, and it's kind of cool to see, that other side of people bringing like the artistic value or whatever different outlets that they have. But SASE really just supporting that in general. But yeah, in talking about kind of those like bringing your holistic self and all your other stuff, we were wondering a little more about maybe some stuff that you've been picking up during COVID, any new hobbies and stuff. And also wanted to ask about volleyball. I think volleyball is a pretty common interest along the SACE community. So I don't know, maybe we could figure out some way to get everyone together on that. But
For the COVID, it's just a challenge. I think most people know I have 4 young kids. And so the whole bit of getting them, online school, hiring a tutor, both my wife and I work, and work jobs that require a lot of our energy. And so there was no way that we could have tutored our kids at the same time. And we're lucky and blessed enough to be able to afford someone who could come in and help the kids and get them focused and who has an education background. So we're very lucky there. As far as hobbies, just trying to, at this point, just keep my head above the water and survive. We've done like everybody else, done things, we bought some bikes, so we've been biking around a little bit, more nature
nice.
walks.
Love it.
We bought a small swimming pool for the kids out above ground, so they've enjoyed it during the summer. We're kind of remodeling our family room. We built our house 11 years now. And so it's about time. Things are starting to fail. So it's a perfect time. You get out the old stuff that's not working, like our microwave died like a month ago. So we got a new microwave. And just staying above water is kind of the key right now for me. But volleyball, man, where do I begin? And I don't know how it came to be, honestly. I love personally volleyball because I used to play. There's this place that's called the Island in Colorado, and it's literally a warehouse size building that they dump tons of sand in, and we play sand volleyball year round. And I started with them, gosh, like a few months since they opened, and I found out about them and I joined and I played. Man, when I was before the kids, right? Before the kids, we used to play volleyball till 2 or 3 in the morning. I mean, with the sunrise. So we play this game called Hook, right? And so basically it is you play until you make a mistake, and that's when you get hooked out and you substitute in. And we would play that for like 7 or 8 hours, right? We were just like play through Friday night till Saturday morning, go out, have breakfast, and crash the next day. So I was pretty serious. I mean, I would fly. They also host one of the largest volleyball vacation. So literally when you go on these volleyball vacation, we would go down to one of the resorts now that have a really long beach, Cozumel or some of the other places. And for 7 days, basically in the morning, you would wake up at sunrise. You played volleyball till about 10, 11 o'clock. When the sand gets too hot, then you stop. And they would change your partner. So you'd play 4. So you'd team up with that person through that morning, and then you get a new partner, and then you and another group would play 4 on 4. And you would do that in the morning. You go eat, sleep, and then when the sand gets less hot around 4 or 5, you go and you play until sunset, and then you party until 1 or 2, and you do that for 7 days. Right? It was serious volleyball. One time I was partner up with Brent Doble, the second ranked guy in the world in volleyball. Of course, he made it look really easy, and I'm like swimming in mud, right? I'm like trying to hustle. He's like, "Oh, this is easy, bump, and I'll set you up," and all this stuff. And I just, and of course he's like 6'6". I think he's around 6'5", 6'6", and of course I'm only 5'7", so a lot of things came naturally to him, like spiking and blocking and some other things. But I used to do that. I used to go on these volleyball vacations, so I love volleyball. When we went to Dallas,
I think it
the
was
national
Dallas.
conference,
Yeah.
You remember we went to the volleyball place?
I do remember. It was one of the best after conference
Yeah.
party things. I remember there was just it was like a bar or something, but then there was a
Yep.
bunch of beach volleyball
Oh my
nets.
God.
And then we were just playing volleyball like the whole entire night.
Yeah, we closed the place down. I
Yeah,
mean,
we
literally,
did.
they extended maybe a couple hours for us, but we closed it down. And I warned them. I was like, "Hey, we're a fun-loving group. We work hard and we play hard. You might want to stock up on your liquor a little bit."
Yeah,
because
for sure.
and they said, "Okay, okay." But they would, I talked to them afterwards, and they said, "Hey, you guys are welcome back anytime,"
Mm,
because they made a lot of money out of us,
yeah.
and we didn't cause them any trouble.
No, we did.
We're a
We were
good group.
responsible. Yeah, we're
Yeah,
responsible.
we're really a good group, but we play hard though.
We party
That's
hard and work hard and play
definitely
hard.
definitely. So I don't know where the volleyball thing came in, but it may be from that year when we were in Dallas and that everybody picked it up. I love volleyball. I have an outdoor volleyball, a nice outdoor volleyball net, but I stopped playing volleyball after my third kid because I felt bad because when I played volleyball, my wife would have to watch 2, 3 kids by herself. And so I was like, so I haven't played volleyball in a while, but once the youngest one gets, I'm hoping to teach her volleyball. So
Yeah.
that's one of the things. But yeah, I don't know how volleyball came to be part of SACE, but I'm glad it is.
Oh, nice. Are you gonna get once your youngest gets old enough, maybe a good team of uh, Khan's family for a volleyball team? It'd be
Mhm.
pretty good.
Yeah, I'd love to teach her volleyball skills. I mean, she's pretty athletic as it is. And in my third guy, he's Mr. Ninja Warrior. He jumps around the house and he swings off of things. He does the monkey bars going all the way across already, and he's only 6. So he's body to strength ratio. He's the athletic one in the family. So
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. You mentioned like a lot of adulting things like remodeling your house and all that sort of thing. One last thing we'd like to ask our guests is like, in what part of your life or major event do you think made you graduate to the adult table from, the kids table?
that's actually a really good question. I think there are milestones
Mm-hmm.
in adulting, right?
Yeah.
One of them is getting a job, getting a full-time job. I think that's, learning about that. One of them is getting married. I've definitely been more of adult. If I didn't get married, I'd probably be still a kid at heart. And having kids, having kids, owning a house, those are definitely milestones where especially with a kid, you are more responsible for someone else than they for themselves, in the sense that they are totally helpless when they come out. They depend on you, right? 100%. And you have to take that into consideration. So it's not about me. When you have a partner, they're an adult. They make their own decisions. And, if you leave them alone for a while, that's okay. You're not attached at the hip. You can't do that with kids, especially when they're babies, right? And that's something that I think so some of our folks have to understand, that it's actually takes a lot of energy and time and love, of course. And there are so much rewards with that. I mean, my daughter knows she has me wrapped around her finger. She's my princess. She knows that. And she's the boss of the house. And, even though I say I love all my kids, the other kids go, no, you don't love us equally. You love her the most. Right. Daddy's girl.
Yeah.
Because the other 3 are boys, right?
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, I
That's
love them.
Oh.
Yeah, and she's the youngest. So, yeah, I think those are the milestones in your life as you learn and you're ready for them. I didn't get married until I was 35. I knew that I wanted to travel the world, and I did. So every year since I got out of college, I traveled someplace internationally. That was my goal.
Mhm.
And so I had some great fun, wild adventures, stuff you do 20, but, and I was able to retire. I worked extremely hard though. I worked extremely hard because I was working a full-time engineering job and also supporting my parents on the weekends at their store,
Yep.
and things like that. So, I started working when I was in 7th grade. because my parents had a convenience store at the time. So when other kids had fun stuff to do, I would go up and work at the convenience store. Typical immigrant story, right?
I
Whether it's a
relate. I relate
restaurant,
to that. Yep. Restaurant.
whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a grocery store, whether it's a liquor store, whether it's a convenience store, whatever, it's a typical immigrant story. And so when I graduated college, I wanted to have fun. I want to be, I want to relive some of those lives. So that's why I think part of me is because I've worked so hard when I was, basically starting at 12. I remember when they were shooting fireworks outside for 4th of July or New Year's, I was still stocking stuff in the aisle at the grocery store around midnight, right? And there were days where we were so tired. We worked 12, 14-hour days. It's just physical that we slept on rice pallets. Rice comes in these big pallets. We were so tired. I just slept on a rice pallet for like 6 or 7 hours, and I'd get up and do it again, right? And so when I got to college, got a job, and we finally sold the store, I just made up that time and had a lot of fun. But when I became an adult was when I got married, 35, and then when I had my first son, 37. So, that's when I had to focus more not on me,
Mm-hmm.
but on him, my relationship with my wife, and the other kids to come. And so I think that really, for me at least, helped me focus. And I think, each one of us has to live our own lives. So when you're ready, you're ready. If you're not ready, don't try to force it. If it's not going to happen, those ultimatums. I had a friend who gave an ultimatum. The wife gave an ultimatum to the husband. And I still see that the husband once in a while has these dreams of, oh, I wish I did this, I wish I did that, because she basically told him, if we're not going to get married, then I'm leaving. And he felt under the gun to say, okay, let's get married. But I still sense from him once in a while that he wasn't ready yet, right? Yeah, there is a season for everything, and as you discover who you are as an adult and what you're ready for, and when you're ready, I think you'll know that time. And when you meet the right person, you'll know it's the right person.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad from working at the supermarket and working long hours that you got to kind of live out that mantra, SASE, of work hard, play hard, bit. And yeah, I think it's really interesting hearing your side as being a parent. I think growing up, trying to mature into like the adult side, I think I appreciated it a lot more of like the parenting side and the amount of energy and amount of stress and amount of thought that goes into it that you kind of don't think about too much when you're kind of growing up trying to figure things out on your own. But definitely appreciate you sharing that story. Unfortunately, I think this is all the time that we have for the podcast right now. Yeah, I just want to thank you, Khan, for coming on the adult table. And for those listening, I hope you enjoyed it, got to learn a little bit more about Khan and his life outside of SACE. Khan is always a friendly face and at any of the conferences. So feel free to go up, say hi to him, tell how much you loved him on the podcast, or anything about
Or his food content.
yeah. Any recommendations for food or anything like that. Khan, just for the listeners, where can they find you? Do you want to plug any of your socials or anything like that?
Yeah, well, I'll plug SACE, obviously. So follow us, SACE on Facebook, Instagram. We have LinkedIn for the professionals. And if you follow SACE on those, you will see me as one of the first person to like, retweet, repost all of those. So
True.
I'm also on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And feel free to reach out to me. I mean, this is why I do what I do, right? The story that you shared, Jason, about how that has affected you, and Jenny, how you grew up. And I've seen Jenny through all the different phases of SACE,
You
even
have.
being on the magazine, you're the role model of the magazine,
Yeah.
and how you've gained that confidence and that leadership skill. And you have a whole group of people now looking up to you too.
I
You've
know,
got
it's weird.
and so to me, that's the joy, really. That's the joy of what I do. And I hope that, our listeners are able to have that joy and be able to give back and become leaders themselves. So thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for being brave enough to start this podcast, and thank you for making me the inaugural interviewee for this first one. So yeah, don't be afraid to reach out to me.
Okay. Yeah, it was a pleasure to have you, Khan. Like, I've always enjoyed any conversations we had in my second year when we were planning Northeast Regional Conference. And that was the first time I met you. And I was probably like, I was still figuring things out, and I still am, but I just remember that moment. It was like, wow, we've come a long way.
Yep, we have.
Yeah.
And it keeps growing. And you guys are going to grow into the person that you were meant to be, right? And take advantage of all the stuff that you can, and learn from it and grow from it. And it's not going to be perfect. Sometimes it's ugly. I wasn't perfect. I mean, I made a lot of stupid mistakes, and good thing that most of them has not come back to bite me, so I've grown as an individual, and you will too.
Yes, to listeners out there, don't forget to subscribe so you know when episodes come out. And we also have an Instagram. You can follow us at the Adult Table Podcast for any updates or anything we plug. And I'm Jenny Chung.
And I'm Jason Chin. We will see you next time at the Adult Table. Thanks for listening, everyone.